Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Edwood Summit podcast. This is number 8, Edwood Summit podcast number 8. I'm sitting here and I'm having a little bit of audio technicalities, so hopefully I'm not sitting here speaking and thinking that it's being recorded, and really it's just going to be a silent video. Because if that were the case, as I, finish this off, and it turned out there was no audio, I would still post it. It's just how I am. So this week here at the Edwood Summit podcast, I'm Greg Javer. Visit Edwood Wednesdays at the Dead to Rights blog, d2r.blogspot.com, where you'll find Edwood articles, over nearly 500 articles, I think, and counting, written by my cohort, Joe Blevins, the founder of the Edwood Wednesdays portion of the Dead to Rights blog, as well as myself since 2015. And then recently this year, at the beginning of this year in January, I started to do some of these podcasts just for the heck of it. I thought it would be fun to do something differently, and I've been enjoying it. So much so that I started a sister podcast last week, or perhaps a brother podcast, right? We don't want to be sexist. So Faster Podcast Kill, which I've got to give credit to. I said I was talking to a friend of mine, a fellow Edwood colleague, Paul Apel, Paul Apel. That name may ring a bell for you, and it's going to be relevant here in a moment. Paul Apel. I said to him, I was talking to him on Facebook last week, and I said, hey, look, I shot a podcast interview with an interesting guy. He made, a lot of cult classic exploitation films, and I'm striking out right now. I don't have a clever name for what the blog could be. And he sent me 2 or 3 suggestions very, very quickly. And the second one of them jumped right out at me. And I said, that's it. And he said, yeah, that was my favorite one too. So the sister blog to the Edwood Summit podcast is Faster Podcast Kill. Faster Podcast Kill. So I'll link to the first episode there in the description to this video. This video, though, is certainly going to be about Ed Wood. And going back to Paul Apel. So this is following on from last week. Last week, Edwood Wednesdays, you would have seen posted the 7th episode of the Edwood Summit podcast, which was about the script, the Frank Leahy Legend, the first draft of the script of the Frank Leahy Legend, written by Edward D. Wood Jr. in 1975, copywritten in 1976. We broke that down at length. I think we did a pretty good job, hopefully bringing to the fore some of the reasons why it was exciting for us to see Ed's hand within a text that's different than we would have expected, certainly at this late stage in the game, by which point Ed is pretty much writing almost entirely in the adult industry. And to get a gig somehow where he's writing a screenplay about the legendary Notre Dame coach Frank Leahy, second only to Newt Rockne in Notre Dame lore, second only to Newt Rockne in winning percentage among NCAA Division I coaches. So I say this like it matters to me. It's become fascinating over the course of the last 5 or 6 weeks, because 6 weeks or so ago, this was not something I'd ever really thought much about. I knew that Ed had included on one of his resumes the Frank Leahy Legend, a script, and it was surmised that it was based on a book from 1974 called The Frank Leahy Legend, and turns out that's all true. And again, we broke the script down for you last week. I do want to say, many times in the course of the previous podcasts, when Paul and I talked about the script, I said the book, when really I meant the screenplay, because I had started to bleed it all into my head. I had read the book on Kindle. It's available. A 2009 reprint of the 1974 book, The Frank Leahy Legend, was reprinted in 2009. As Iron Desire, and you can get that for like $2.99 or $3.99, and it is substantially, the same book as the original. How do I know that? Well, eventually, of course, I took it upon myself to go ahead and order the original book, and just received it yesterday, as a matter of fact. And although I've opened it up, so it's not the first time I've looked at it. I looked at it briefly last night. I didn't go deeply into it. So we're going to do that together here today. It's going to be fun. This isn't going to be in depth to the extent that we covered the screenplay, because this is a book that was uh, credited to an author named Bernie Williams, and he was reputedly, as is claimed in the book and in the screenplay, a friend of Frank Leahy, a close friend of Frank Leahy in later life. And he interviewed Frank Leahy a couple years before he passed in 1973, and then in 1974-ish time frame, a number of books came out about Frank Leahy, including the unauthorized biography, unauthorized, even though based on recorded tapes, reputedly, the Frank Leahy Legend. So I had written about this on Edward Wednesdays in an article, perhaps roughly a month ago, 5 weeks ago, and it was the first time it had really bubbled up into my consciousness. At which point, I didn't really know that the script was obtainable. I certainly didn't know that within a matter of weeks, I was going to get to read the script. So this has been a rather fun ride. This has been one of the most fun rides of all my Ed Wood research over the course of you know previous years and years, many years now running, and I've had a lot of fun digging into various aspects of Ed's life and work. But this one's been sort of special. I'm not sure exactly why. Again, if you have heard me talk about this before in last week's podcast, or you read that article, I'm not really possessing a great affinity for Frank Leahy, for the winner mentality at Notre Dame, the Sunday or Saturday. I think college football games are played on a Saturday. The rah rah. It's the most important event, obviously, of the week. It's the most important event uh, of your life to go to a Notre Dame football game. It's not for me, again, but that's me. So I don't want to judge other people. That being said, I do, as I over the course of the last month have found out a number of other items about Notre Dame lore and things of that nature. I find it interesting. I mean, again, I don't really think I get Frank Leahy, if that makes sense. I don't think that I um, have a personal affinity for Frank Leahy, where it was. I've never. Well, in a way, actually, let's do this. Let's do this. I just thought of this. Frank Leahy had this insistence he was just going to play for Notre Dame, and that was all he was going to do. And winning for Notre Dame, it really was the the meaning of his life, the core foundation of his life. And I just thought, as I was saying that a moment ago, I thought, well, you could say my persistence, this don't quit mentality, and we're going to talk about the don't quit mentality, and shortly a little bit more about the don't quit mentality. This don't quit mentality, maybe I in my own way possess it in a very different way, not pursuing, the highest winning percentage of any NCAA Division I football coach of all time. Not trying to um, go beyond the storied record of Newt Rockne to try to become somebody who was not only Notre Dame tried and true, but became a new benchmark of excellence. I think, frankly, he really, really aspired to that. And so I'm not saying for a minute here that I'm aspiring to any great lengths of excellence, but I can perhaps, now that I think about it, I can perhaps relate in the sense that I have certainly pursued a don't quit mentality when it comes to researching the life and work of Ed Wood. So me and Frank Leahy were like that. So perhaps we just continue to come together eventually over time. My affinity for Frank Leahy will grow, and eventually you'll see me in the stadium in my own private box at South Bend on a Saturday afternoon. I don't think so, but you really never know. So yes, I got the book. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the book. Again, this is more an episode that, think of this one as a little bit of a stepping stone. Paul and I talked at great length about the screenplay last week. I can tell you rest assured that both he and I, and especially Paul, he's been killing it in terms of getting deeper into the provenance of the screenplay, of the copyright, of other elements around it, which again, not going to step on his toes and get into it now. Hopefully he'll join me back here so we can talk about it some more. Hopefully he will, put together an article and detail everything that he's found out. I found out some other things subsequently, but some of that, again, we're going to work the details out because this is going to become an it has already become an ongoing story, and I feel the need right now for whatever bizarre reason to perpetuate it. So today, though, we're going to just talk about the book. Let's take a step back from the screenplay, the book that it was based on, the Frank Leahy Legend. So it was published in early 1974. In the original article at Edward Wednesdays that I wrote about this 5 or 6 weeks ago, Joe Blevins, who laid the article out, and he always does my articles. He does a great job with the layout. Sometimes he does some really good job, some judicious copy editing, some good additions and details. And this time around, he found a magazine or newspaper promo for the book. You can buy the book from JCL Services in Torrance, California for $14.95. It's 8.5 by 11. It's over 200 pages. The blurb is very ballyhoo. I'm not even going to get into the language in the blurb right now, because again, we're going to get there. Today, take a step back. So the book, you could have bought it in 1974, and it said it comes in a gift box. What that turns out to be, the gift box, is actually what in today's world we would call a slip cover, a cardboard slip cover. It turns out to be leather bound. I don't know if it's actual leather. It looks like leather bound. Well over 200 pages. $14.95 in that world of 1974. I was able to obtain it on eBay. It was listed a really good quality copy with the slipcover. You'll find copies with the slipcover missing. You'll find old library copies a little bit more cheaply. You'll find actually copies of the book in paperback form, which it was also published in paperback form, which I've not yet seen. But the hardcover form is again in a faux leather bound cover, and I think about 270 pages long. We're going to look here in a moment, so don't quote me on that. And in a thick cardboard slipcover with nice color image on it. Says in that ad it's in a gift box, but that's the slipcover. But $14.95 then. So it was on eBay, this particular copy, for about 26 bucks with like $6 in shipping, with a make an offer button. So make an offer. I don't negotiate well in this sense. So I always ask my significant other, Kitten, I ask her when I need help, make an offer for me. You're better at negotiating these things down. So she was able to negotiate it down to about 20 bucks and then get media mail shipping for just a couple bucks. So I paid a little over $20 for it. So I think with shipping included in 1974, you might have paid, $17.45. I think the shipping was $2.50. So I paid roughly about $4 or $5 more than that in 2021 to obtain this. So it came in a manila folder, so it was wrapped in a manila folder and then wrapped in a U.S. postal envelope. It wasn't in any packing material or anything, but well wrapped and sealed and in great condition. But I thought that was a little risky on the part of the eBay seller to not put it in any packing material. But it clearly did not, having glanced at it last night, it clearly made it through the U.S. Postal Service without getting run through the mud or raked over the coals, so to speak. So it's in great condition. So here's the front cover of the slip cover. That's Frank Leahy, of course, and you could see this isn't his actual signature. This is printed on the slip cover. Yes, I got a vintage mint edition signed by Frank Leahy copy of the Frank Leahy Legend. I didn't, but that's just the image that's on every other slipcover copy of the book in this format. So very cool, right? Very, very cool. So that's got him looking very sportsmanlike and very focused. And we see some imagery in the background, suggesting, the storied history of Notre Dame, its religious roots, perhaps, which really are tangential to the Frank Leahy legend, as much as, we're talking about Notre Dame being an institution founded by Catholics, but not the point. Winning is more the point. So let's look at the back. So I just slipped it out of the slipcover, so you could see very thick piece of cardboard. This is in really, really great condition. Hardly a little, very minor shelf scuffing at all, as a matter of fact. And it's good thick cardboard. Here's a picture of the campus, and of course the stadium, even more importantly, on the back cover of the slipcover. It's very impressive, right? You could see, this is in both the book and the screenplay, anywhere you went on campus in South Bend, if you were on the campus of Notre Dame, you could see the stadium from there. It was the vantage point that your eyes focused on if you were on campus, because this is the most important thing about going to Notre Dame. It was Notre Dame football. So anyhow, I'm going to offend a lot of Notre Dame fans again. Not that they're ever going to watch this, but so stamped with some gold embossing, we get a nice image, again, evoking Notre Dame, as well as the title of the book on the cover, the Frank Leahy Legend. You could see it does look leather bound again. Is it, when they say, I'm not a book expert, so I shouldn't even opine on that, but when they say leather bound, does that really mean that, it's actual leather? I don't necessarily think so. It's made out of some composite material, some kind of leather, faux leather, I'm sure, but it sounds good to say that it's leather bound, and it very well, like I said, could be, but it's in great condition. The book itself is, you can tell it's just got a little bit of spreading where the pages are starting to get a little dry. It's just starting to spread just a little bit, but it's in great condition. You could see, again, there's not a lot of finger marks along the edge, which indicates to me that really hardly anybody ever really even leafed through it. So this is something that somebody bought. It sat, on a shelf or in a box or in storage, or kind of, is it a coffee table item, right? Is it kind of a coffee table item in that it's this rather ornate package, right? So if you were a Notre Dame fan, a big Notre Dame fan, and you had friends who were other big Notre Dame fans, maybe you would, buy this book, put it on your coffee table. How many copies of this book actually got sold? I can't imagine there was a ton, right? It's interesting that there's still quite a few copies that are available, readily available, but I can't imagine. I didn't look into it, to be honest, so I shouldn't, again, opine on things that I don't know about, but I don't think this was a bestseller. I would venture to say this was not a bestseller, right? In any case, we'll take a look at the book here. We'll crack it open. This I liked when I looked at it. Right on the inside of the cover and the front page, it's got a lot of old articles, old Notre Dame articles, and they sell the theme immediately, right? The Irish win opener easily. Boilermakers are no match for the Irish. Navy swamped by Irish. Notre Dame does nothing wrong. Tulane routed. Notre Dame 46, Tulane 7. So then, so that sets the tone, obviously. There's the national, right, and right on this front page, this particular picture, if you can sort of see it, is the 1949 team. They were a national championship team. They were coached by Frank Leahy. Amazingly enough, in a book called The Frank Leahy Legend. So we page into this a little bit. An unauthorized biography by B.J. Williams, Bernard J. Williams, it turns out is his name. Unauthorized, again, there were numerous biographies that came out right around the same time about Frank Leahy, and I think unauthorized. If I was going to say, if this is really based on an interview by Bernie Williams with Frank Leahy, then why would you go unauthorized, or would you go unauthorized because you just don't want to get in any legal wrangling? He's passed away. Who knows, right? I don't know what the legal protection. I don't know how I don't know how copyright law works. I don't know what color the sky is. I don't know, right? I don't know these things. So, in any case, I think to myself, it's interesting that it's an unauthorized biography. I'll just put it that way. I think it's interesting. Um, Not suggesting that this isn't based on actual recorded interview with Frank Leahy, because again, it claims to be that. Why would I question that? There's no reason for me to question that. 1974 by JCL Services Incorporated in Torrance, California. So in the ad, you'll see in the ad that Joe Blevins found and posted in that article at Edward Wednesdays, which I'll put in the description box. It says, send your $14.95 plus, I think, $2.50 shipping. Send it to 1753 Cabrillo Avenue in Torrance, California, JCL Services. So it lines up with this, but it gives us a street address. That building today is now an overseas church ministry, a charity. Looks like they translate a lot of classics in Mandarin Chinese classic literature. And for Chinese people emigrating to the United States who are also going to become Christian, and they raise money off of that as a charity. So nothing to do, obviously, with JCL Services. The building has been sold a couple times in the intervening years since 1974. But realty sites mention that this particular building at 1753 Cabrillo Avenue in Torrance is a realty site anyway, said it's a quote unquote medical building. I think it's more so an office building. It's like a mid-sized kind of office building on the corner of a block next to a large apartment residence at 1751. So it's kind of a residential area for the most part. Interesting thing I found, and again, Paul and I are going to get far more deeply into a lot of this. Interesting thing I found, and I'll leave it at this: JCL Services. I found an article mentioning, and they were listed at the same address, and I believe the year was also 1974, that they were listed as a military contractor. So they published this book. They were also a military contractor. Lots more about that story. I'm telling you, we figured, Paul again has figured more out than I, but we figured out quite a bit about this. So Bernard J. Williams, businessman, industrialist, manufacturer, inventor, merchandiser. Mr. Williams was Frank Leahy's closest friend. It was this intimate association and complete trust that Frank Leahy had in Bernie Williams, which made the writing of this book possible. There's also a gentleman named Leslie O. Read, or Reed, R-E-A-D, um, son of Opie Read, or Opie Reed, famous novelist, and past president of the Chicago Press Club. So he's listed as the co-author. You would assume the book is largely told in the interview format, so it's first person, Frank Leahy telling a story, but there's a lot of wrap around material at the beginnings and ends of chapters and lead-ins and things like that. So you would think is this guy, perhaps if Bernie Williams is a businessman and industrialist, does he need somebody like Leslie O'Red, who's a writer, to help him package this together? It makes sense. It completely makes sense. Although you don't find much out if you search much about Leslie O'Red or Leslie O'Reed. Although his dad, Opie Read, or Opie Reed, again, R-E-A-D, in the 19th century, a novelist, he apparently, not the person who coined the phrase, but was the first person to use the phrase in print, at least some people say. There's a sucker born every minute. Kind of interesting, and I'll leave it at that. So the dedication. This book is dedicated to my lovely wife, Donna, D-A-W-N-A, who never lost faith, whose encouragement and confidence constantly spurred me on. Each day, beautiful memories of her continue to provide comfort and solace. So that's nice. She passes away in the book. In the end of the book, Frank goes to visit her, and they have pretty affecting sort of exchange, and Frank, of course, knows how much Bernie's broken up by the passing of his wife. So Bernie, of course, dedicated it to his wife, Donna. It's nice to see. We go to the table of contents. There's a ton of chapters here. I'm going to jump ahead real quick because I said, 270 pages or something when I glanced at it last night. It says in the ad that it's over 200 pages. It is in actuality got 340 numbered pages. 340 pages. So this, as you can see, is quite the thick tome. So the table of contents lists a ton of chapters, including things we talked about that are in the screenplays based on this, very, very much so. Draws a ton from the book. Sometimes dramatizes things differently, adds different details. Sometimes adds, as we spoke about, go back to last week's episode, and Paul and I talked a lot about how it's got Ed's specific sort of obsessions and themes and motifs that he can't help but insert into the story. Here you have that basic story told just a little bit differently, not all that differently, quite frankly, just again in terms of format. But chapter 2 is the burning of a new barn. The burning of the barn is a great dramatic scene in the screenplay. Chapter 7, and I'm going to go to this because this is something Paul and I were subsequently talking, and I said, one thing, we went on at great length talking about the screenplay, but we really didn't get into the don't quit credo very much. But chapter 7, Frank Leahy's don't quit creed. I said credo, and I just looked at it and says creed. That's funny. So page 75, do you see it, folks? I just flipped the page. I flipped the page to go deeper into the book. I knew it was on page 75 from the table of contents. And I came to page 75, Frank Leahy's Don't Quit Creed. There's reasons why this happens when you get aligned with sort of the stars. Frank Leahy's a star. He's a legend. The stars that align, over the stadium at South Bend, I'm sure every Friday night before the game. But chapter 7. So I indulge me. If you've listened this much, of course, you're willing to indulge me as we read a little bit of chapter 7. Frank Leahy's Don't Quit Creed. Very nice picture on the facing page where he is clearly, a young man at the time, probably when he's a player, when he was a tackle. And he was a legend, as we've said. So Frank Leahy's Don't Quit Creed. So again, the narrative structure of the book is Bernie Williams is telling the story about, I talked to Frank Leahy, and this is the interview that we had, and he takes me through his life story, and there's a little wraparound. So that's the narrative structure. Frank Leahy's Don't Quit Creed, chapter 7. Our next taping session with Frank opened up on a sad note. He looked as gloomy as a lone figure standing in a dark tunnel. Hurriedly, he blotted tears from his eyes. The doc said I've had my good days and my bad days, he mumbled. This happens to be one of the tough ones. Too bad a guy can't be handed a schedule for each day, pinpointing the troubles he'll have so that he'll be able to handle rugged situations. Be prepared. A typical sheet would run something like this: easy going all morning. Look out for a bad gut ache along about 4 in the afternoon. You'll have trouble sleeping, so prepare for a wakeful period, and so on. Do you follow me? I follow you okay, Frank, I said. Are you in any pain? Yes, pain in my emotions. Just before you came, the kids downstairs in the backyard were playing a recording of all the college songs. So when they got to the Notre Dame fight song, I crumpled. It really got me, Bernie. What are the odds, right? He's, I think, he's on the West Coast. I think he's in the area of Portland, Oregon. That's where he's buried. More to come on that, actually, in a future episode, because that's interesting as well. But Bernie Williams was living again, he was living around Southern California when he got the book published. So, we're talking about JCL Services being in Torrance, California. Newport Beach is mentioned later on in the book. That's where Bernie's staying, where he lives, presumably, when Donna's passing. So at this point, 1971, Frank is on the West Coast. He's not he's not at South Bend, right? And he's not he's no longer and has not long been, 17 years or so, the coach of Notre Dame. So what are the odds that, just outside in the backyard, while I was sitting around feeling sorry for myself because, and again, I'm not trying to be facetious. He did fight hard, and he fought leukemia for well over a decade of his life, almost 2 decades, and fought very, very hard. And I'm sure it was a very brutal struggle that he went through. But what are the odds that while he happens to be just sitting there having a rough day, a bad day, whereas he's feeling terrible, kids are playing in the yard, and the Notre Dame fight song comes on. I just I personally I find it incredulous, right? It sounds too prepackaged, too good to be true. When we talked about the script about exactly that sort of thing where it's over dramatized again to paint this picture of Frank Leahy where it's putting him on a pedestal. It is called the Frank Leahy Legend, so I guess you're asking people to believe that he's a legendary figure just on faith before you even get into it, and then you've got to substantiate that. Anyway, I really thought as I got into this that I was going to just do a little brief snippet about the book, talk a little bit about the book, and as staging ground for as we get deeper into this Frank Leahy story, vis-a-vis, of course, Ed Wood, which is the jumping off point. And now I can't help myself, right? For a moment, I thought he was going to crumple again. I stood up and walked toward the window. Outside, black clouds were organizing for some sort of a downpour. Not to be left out of the weather scene, the wind was jumping about in nervous gyrations. Leaves, no longer able to hang on the branches, succumbed to air spurts, making visible a typical fall pattern. I looked at Frank. It seemed that the skids of hope had been yanked from under him. Things are not always as bad as they seem, I said. You're right, Bernie. They're worse. Let's face it, if those kids hadn't played the Notre Dame fight song, I would have hung on to my cool. I remember way back when I was going to high school in winter, there was this very pretty girl I was dating right along. One night at a school dance, I noticed that she was quiet and had difficulty getting rid of an occasional tear. I didn't say anything, but I knew something was up. She was always the happiest, most cheerful person I'd met since my first contact with Santa Claus at a department store. Right? Santa Claus at a department store was the happiest, most cheerful person he had met all the way until he met a crying girl in high school. What was wrong? I asked. Well, I found out soon enough. We were on the dance floor. The band was running through a lot of college songs. Everybody was in exceptionally high spirits. Everybody but my girl. Even I was skimming the peaks of a joyous mood, for the band had now reached the Notre Dame fight song. As I was about to burst out in a voice that never had a chance of winning the attention of grand opera scouts, my girl, Marie was her name, said, "There's my brother Lou. He's looking for me. I've got to go." So what happened? I asked. Marie, by the way, he has a daughter named Marie. That's just a little sideline. I danced her around to where her brother was standing and shepherded her to him. Paying no attention to me, the brother said, "Dad's guilty. The judge gave him 10 years in Leavenworth." Marie clung to her brother, and together they maneuvered out of the auditorium. As I stood there, I heard the final bars of the Notre Dame fight song. I felt very sad. "What was your dad convicted of?" I asked. "It was in the paper the next morning. Mail fraud. Some get rich." I'm not. I, I want to get to the part about this is the chapter about the don't quit creed, so you could see. Uh, I guess the only thing I'll say, does this sound like an interview? Does this sound like Frank Leahy generally spoke like this? Does this sound like an interview? Might be a rhetorical question. So right there, mail fraud. Okay, dad was convicted of mail fraud. Again, I don't want to get into that. We talked last week about how in the screenplay and the book, we'll get into it later on as well. He essentially agrees to an insider trading scheme, a stock market insider trading scheme, and he is not the the most ethically sort of well-scrubbed guy you'll meet, being also an adulterer, as is revealed in the screenplay. So I want to get to the don't quit bit here. So we have conversation, lots of stories from Frank, and interjections from Bernie. So the poem "Don't Quit." So the end of the chapter, finally we get to it. I'll skip through this quickly. Frank Leahy was no quitter. He was neither a quitter on the football field, nor was he a quitter in his desperate battle for his life. And then the word quit's mentioned a few times. Frank spoke. I have here a very remarkable poem entitled Don't Quit. I believe I have read this poem over 100 times until it has become a creed with me. Before I recite it to you, however, I'd like to tell you of a very serious romance I had while a junior at Winter High School. She was a very beautiful young teacher named Catherine Cranna. I assume that's a real name. It sounds like a real name, spelled Cranna. All of the guys were after her for dates, but I had the inner track. Now get this, my high school coach, Earl Walsh, a Notre Dame graduate, developed a severe yen for her. I might say this, why Earl Walsh ever came to Winter to coach, no one ever could find out. As I stated before, he was one of the contributing factors in getting me the Notre Dame scholarship. So perhaps, see, it's fated somehow. Notre Dame knew to send Earl Walsh to Winter to be his high school basketball coach. This plays out differently, actually, in the screenplay. With Paul and I talked a little bit about this. It's interesting. It's described here. Earl Walsh had a yen for this girl, and then I met her. It's murky, right? The coach in the screenplay basically says, "Hey, let's you and me go out, Frank, and meet some of the dollies," type of thing, and they do. So this is played with a little different emphasis, but it doesn't necessarily paint Earl Walsh in the best light, right? He had a yen for this high school girl, and he was the coach of the basketball team at Winter High School. Um, but again, it plays that he very well could have been there to present eventually, after years of developing this relationship. Here's your scholarship to Notre Dame, Frank. Anyway, he and another girl, and Catherine and I, used to go dancing and to various affairs together, in which many school rules were broken. She, being a teacher, was not supposed to hobnob with pupils, and Earl Walsh, being a coach, was not supposed to hobnob with players on the team. Anyway, we all had some very wonderful times. That's great. That's great. Despite all of that, despite all of the lines that were crossed, we had a great time, or at least Frank thought so. I'll bet you did, I said. That's Bernie Williams. I'll bet you did, I said. So what happened to the romance? Well, I am getting to the Don't Quit poem, by the way. Well, she wanted to get married and go to North Dakota University, where she would continue to teach while I attended North Dakota. But actually, I had nothing to offer this beautiful girl. Moreover, that immutable determination to go to Notre Dame suspended all other scholastic and romantic thoughts. he's extraordinarily articulate, right? Frank Leahy, let me read that sentence again. Um, but actually, I had nothing to offer this beautiful girl. Moreover, that immutable determination to go to Notre Dame superseded all other scholastic and romantic thoughts. Always before me were those three objectives which I had sworn to God to gain. The main one, of course, was to go to Notre Dame. His main objective that he swore to God was to go to Notre Dame. It's mentioned. It's in the. I don't even remember anymore. As you could see, how this all becomes a crazy maelstrom of weirdness. The screenplay of the book, it's mentioned that I reckon something like, I reckon the first words my mama ever heard me say were Notre Dame, Noder. It's spelled to make it seem kind of homey. He's a little child, infant, speaking his first words, Notre Dame, right? How did he find out about it, right? He's growing up in this little town in uh, Winter, South Dakota. He was born in Nebraska. He's but Notre Dame. It was in his blood, I guess. It was in his DNA. It was there. It's there in the moment early on. The birth scene is how the screenplay opens, and it's the air is still, and Frank Sr.'s father is very nervously awaiting the birth of the baby. Then it turns out not only is it a boy, but the boy has large hands, boxer's hands, and it's a very heady moment where clearly, he's a very special individual. He's not like the rest of us. He was tapped for something, and it turned out not to be boxing. He knew it. His dad thought differently, but he knew in his bones, Frank Leahy, that he was tapped to play for Notre Dame. And I don't even know, would he have known as a young man that he could eventually coach for Notre Dame? That would he eventually think that he would play for Newt Rockne? It's astonishing, right? So that's his first objective. The main one, of course, was to go to Notre Dame. This may sound funny, but up to that time, I didn't even know where Notre Dame was located. As far as I was concerned, it could have been in California. Frank paused, then said, I'm ready to recite that poem. It is entitled Don't Quit. With excellent delivery, he proceeded. This is what he said. So after he, talked about his main objective, Notre Dame, he said, he paused for a moment, and he said, I'm ready to recite that poem. It's entitled Don't Quit. So now in the screenplay, this scene comes up briefly, I think, in the screenplay, but it's murky. My recollection is it's murky in the screenplay. Here, I just read it. He doesn't ascribe it to. He says, that poem. It's some poem that he always loved. In the screenplay, I think it's sort of almost as if the poem's ascribed to him, a poem that Frank Leahy wrote. He didn't write it. We'll talk about that in a moment. So you have probably, perhaps, have heard this poem. Perhaps. Don't quit. When things go wrong, as they sometimes will, when the road you're trudging seems all uphill, when the funds are low and the debts are high and you want to smile but you have to sigh, when care is pressing you down a bit, rest if you must, but don't you quit. Life is queer with its twists and turns, and every one of us sometimes learns. Many a fellow turns about when he might have won had he stuck it out. Don't give up though the pace seems slow. You may succeed with another blow. Often often the goal is nearer than it seems to a faint and faltering man. Success is failure turned inside out, the silver tint of the clouds of doubt. And you never can tell how close you are. It may be near when it seems afar. So stick to the fight when you're hardest hit. It's when things seem worst that you mustn't quit. Then it says at the end of this, it says at the very end of the poem, compliments John J. Looser, Looser. In matter of fact, the poem is written by a gentleman named John Whittier Greenleaf. It's a 19th century poem, reasonably well-known poem. It's a little rocky, of course. There you can see the meter's a little rocky in a couple places, about 2/3 of the way through, but it gets its point across, I guess. So don't quit. Not written by Frank Leahy, but obviously he liked on occasion to recite it. This is I'm going to show this because this is chapter 8. I just turned over to the next chapter. Frank Leahy meets John Kavanaugh. So I'm not going to get into this, but Kavanaugh was instrumental in getting Frank the job at Notre Dame, and was really I think very much a mentor to Leahy, and a little bit of a moral compass. There's a couple points along the way in the screenplay where Father Kavanaugh is a little bit of a moral compass for Frank, where he backs him off a little bit and says, remember that, this is a religious institution. He doesn't say this literally. He says, remember, this is a religious institution. And, yeah, no, we want to win football games, but we don't want to do anything that's untoward, that's unethical, that's wrong. So, Father Kavanaugh, so here's an actual picture, really nice picture. Father Kavanaugh. That's great. So one thing I noticed, Iron Desire, the Kindle version of the Frank Leahy Legend, I got a copy of that a little while ago, and I read that. I don't remember it having as extensive or as many photos. I don't, but again, I could be wrong. I paged through that pretty quickly because I paged through it a couple times pretty quickly. Read most of it, but I was kind of at that time before I had gotten the screenplay a little bit like, this is a strange sort of story, and this just keeps building up this guy, Frank Leahy, in a really weird way. I hope reading a little bit of it, you get a sense of why I thought that, right? It doesn't sound like an actual authentic interview with a human being. It sounds like ballyhooed, right? It sounds like over dramatized to the nth degree. So again, I'm just paging through. We've got Father Kavanaugh, Leahy rooms with Newt Rockne, right? That's a key moment, which again, go back to, here's Newt. Just again, we got a nice picture of Newt. And there's Newt Rockne. And goes through, again, a lot of the things that are in the screenplay, so we're not going to get into this. Goes into him going to Boston College, him head coach at Notre Dame, et cetera, et cetera. Then, of course, it's going to go into him in the business world after he becomes very ill and too ill really to coach anymore. And that's, occupies him for the better part of the last 2 decades of his life. Some failed business ventures, speaking tours, different things. There's actually some cartoony photos here. I paged through a couple of them just now as I was paging through. So here's another one of some guys playing football. So that's interesting. It's signed. This is cool. Obviously I don't recognize the name, but it's a little line drawing, very typical. It's the kind of little very simplistic line drawings that you might see in a Pendulum magazine, written by Ed Wood. I was going to say also written by Ed Wood, but that was the screenplay. This is the book, right? But it's signed Pirrone, Pirrone. So another little clue as we dig deeper into every aspect of the book, The Frank Leahy Legend, as well as the first draft of the screenplay, The Frank Leahy Legend, written by Edward D. Wood Jr. So, again, we talked all about all the other narrative elements. Oh, there's Bernie's send-off at the end, talking about his personal relationship with Frank. Of course, it does go into dramatic scenes where Bernie's wife, Donna, is dying. So here's Leslie O'Reed, so long, Frank Leahy. So he did perhaps again help Bernie write some of this or put some of this together. But here he writes on page 308, so long, Frank Leahy. He gave the world a better football game. In doing so, he built himself a name and spread the word of blessed Notre Dame. He brought the field a thrilling sporting madness. He gave the fans a special winner's gladness. But when he died, too few were touched by sadness. Yes, too many people. Leslie O'Reed is right. Too few people. I'm sorry to laugh at this point. Leslie O'Reed is right. Too few people even really took note of Frank's passing. He had lived in Newt's shadow, I think, and continues to be the case. I did see, searching around a couple of weeks ago, I watched this video. It was like on YouTube, a kid, shows how old I am. He was probably in his early mid-20s, a kid decked out in all this Notre Dame gear and all this Notre Dame memorabilia in the background behind him, spent 25 or 26 minutes talking about Frank Leahy, and you've forgotten Frank Leahy, and he was one of the greatest coaches of all time. And I thought, well, somebody remembers, and we certainly remember. We're remembering now. But that's So Long, Frank Leahy by Leslie O'Reed. Nice little 6 lines, very tight, rhyming, of course. 1974. I'll leave it at that. Chapter 25, interesting angles, statistics, and glimpses. So we do get into football here and talking about stats and stuff. I want to show you, though, another picture real quick, and then I'll tell you what that's Don Miller right there. Don Miller. So Don Miller was on the team that was he was part of the backfield on the 1926 national championship team, and the backfield was dubbed the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. And Don Miller was only 5'8" and only like 152 pounds. The whole backfield was very small guys. Only one guy was a little bit taller. I think it was I think it might have been Sleepy Jim Crowley. I could be getting that wrong, but the Four Horsemen. New concept in football, not big guys, smaller, faster guys, more dexterous, greater sort of speed and dexterity, and changed the game of football. Won a national championship. So Don Miller, we've talked about this a couple of times, and I'll mention it one more time. It's totally coincidental. I'm fairly confident, but you never know in the world of Ed Wood research. But the pseudonym that is ascribed to both writing and producing Necromania, which we know is a movie Ed Wood wrote, produced, and directed in 1971. His epic, I guess, epic sex film. I'm not going to get off track on that, but the pseudonym was Don Miller, right? Here's Don Miller of the Four Horsemen. Again, not connected, I don't think, but it's interesting, right? So more stats, goes year by year through all of Frank's years and the scores of the games and pictures of the teams and the lines. So this is really great. Then we close with a appraisal by Bernard Williams. I'm going to read a little bit of this because it jumps right out at me. It's interesting. There's another Perron cartoony photo on the facing page, but chapter 26, after all these stats, appraisal by Bernard Williams. There's an old hillbilly story that goes like this. A couple of Tennessee mountaineers had paused on a rustic bridge to gaze down at the shallow, muddy stream. All of a sudden, the railing broke and Jed fell in. Luke, however, saved himself by grabbing onto a post. "You'll have to help me out," cried Jed. "My foot is caught." Luke located a long branch and, holding on to one end, maneuvered the other so that Jed could grasp it. There was much tugging and pulling, but Jed remained caught. Finally, Luke threw down the branch and said, "Don't look like I'm making headway, Jed, but I'll tell you what I'll do. If it will make you feel any better, I'll just jump down into the stream with you and keep you company." Here's my point. If Luke had been Frank Leahy, he would have said, "I'm sorry, Jed, old boy, but I've got to be getting on." You see, Frank was only interested in those who could help themselves. "I don't make football players," he once said. "I make football players make themselves." To him, there were but two classifications in the human spectrum: the winners and the losers. He had no time for the losers. Oddly enough, he was brought up in a small town called Winter, South Dakota. Um, that's a good place to end it because that sums it up. And Bernie's obviously that's his appraisal at the end of the book. He's celebrating that mentality, and again bringing up the little goofy winter pun. So that's a very good place for me to absolutely end it. So we get more pictures at the end, and that's it. So let's slide this back into the slipcover, from which it may henceforth never again emerge. No, I'll obviously pull this out periodically and look through it because, again, a lot of work to do, a lot more interest in the Frank Leahy legend, both the screenplay and the provenance of the book itself, as well as the larger story around Frank Leahy and how Ed managed to find a way to connect to it, because he did. And jump back again to last week's podcast and you can find out all about that. So I'm going to call it here. More to come. Paul Apel and I think, are probably going to be back. Hopefully he'll join me to talk more about other related items. We're not done yet in dissecting this particular topic, and I hope in the interim you found this somewhat beneficial. Again, I was really trying to, a stepping stone to future pieces about it. But I think we actually found a couple interesting bits in the book that were, worth a read. And we'll be back, obviously, here at Edwood, the Edwood Summit podcast, and we'll link to these podcasts at Edwood Wednesdays at the Dead to Rights blog. And look here in the description box to this video. I'll link also to the sister blog, Faster Podcast Kill Kill. And I want to thank Paul Apel for joining me sort of in this journey as we continue to go down this road. He and I have bounced a lot of thoughts back and forth across the pond. Actually, we're not across the pond. He's on the West Coast and I'm on the East Coast. He's very close, as a matter of fact, to where Frank Leahy's buried. And perhaps we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a future Edwood Summit podcast. I hope you found this one, as always, enjoyable, beneficial, and thank you.